Hey there, everybody. So glad to have you with me. This is a special edition of our Soul Series webinars that we've been doing. This goes out to all of you who are the most dedicated followers of my Hope Connection e-resource. Those of you that find yourselves as active members of this tribe we're calling the Army of Hope. You might be spreading hope in your family. You might be encouraging greater faith in your faith community. You might be sharing the love in practical ways through serving the homeless or tutoring a troubled teen. In whatever way that you find yourself advancing faith, hope, and love, this is especially for you. I am so excited to share this resource with you. This is one of my favorite topics to teach on, to share with, and this is going out just to those of you who are brand new subscribers to the Hope Connection, and especially to those of you in this Army of Hope tribe who are dedicated, who respond, who are engaging in this content week after week. This is a huge thank you to you for everything that you're doing out there. I hope that this encourages you, challenges you, and gives you greater strength as you go out there advancing faith, hope, and love. I call this webinar today the Soul Symphony, 7 Movements of Listening to the Story. And I will be sharing how to reach out and get this resource. If you want more of it, or if you want to share it with your friends, invite them to subscribe to the Hope Connection. That's one way that they can receive this webinar. I'll be sharing this webinar for all new subscribers through the rest of the summer. And at a couple points, I'll share it with those of you that are active followers of our Hope Connection. So I hope you enjoy. Soul Symphony, 7 Movements to Listening to the Story. I don't know about you, but I struggle so hard at times to listen well. Have you ever been there? I know that when my wife and I go out to dinner, if we're at a restaurant where there's a TV up in the corner of the room or there's a sporting game on, I'm sunk. I just lose focus. I start looking at the TV. I start watching all the people around, and I lose my ability to tune in and listen well. Thankfully, my wife still loves me, and thankfully she gives me abundant chances to make up for my poor listening skills at times. But what about when you're out in the community and you're at a point where you're with someone who's in a crisis and they're in the hospital? Maybe you're their nurse, or maybe they're in a nursing home and you're visiting them as a social worker or a chaplain, or maybe it's one of your clients as a counselor. Maybe it's a young boy or girl in your classroom, and they're in crisis. They're in desperation for someone that will listen to them and care for them and connect to them in a special way. What do you do then? We can't afford to tune out. We can't afford to not listen well to their story that needs to be told, because telling our stories gets out these emotional stressors that we carry with us, and it's a huge step towards finding the healing and the hope to carry on. So this is Soul Symphony, and this is about listening to the story, and I hope that it will encourage you and challenge you and engage you in a way to advance your listening skills so that you will be able to advance faith to the faithless, hope to the hopeless, and love to the brokenhearted. So our objectives today are pretty simple. I hope that by the end of this course, you'll be able to explain why listening is critical to healing, discover how the 3 parts of listening apply to the 7 movements of listening to the story, so the 3 and the 7. I hope that you'll be able to develop greater self-awareness of personal loss in your own story, and then also see the potential landmines that are arising in the person's story that you're caring for. And then finally, the last objective is to practice strategies for navigating the movements. So if you don't already, I'd encourage you to pause this recording, grab a pen and paper, or pull up another screen on your laptop, or use your cell phone to take some notes. And I'd encourage you to, we'll be using some case studies, and I'll be sharing some of my own pitfalls in listening. So hopefully you'll be able to learn from my mistakes and see where I've learned to grow in this area. And I'd encourage you to jot down some notes and ask some questions and talk to your team members, talk to your family members. Talk to folks that you're in the trenches with in the Army of Hope and find out how they approach listening at these levels. So let's begin with the foundation of listening. So the question we're beginning with is, are we born good listeners? Or do we learn how to listen? Do we develop the ability to listen? I love the book, The Art of Listening by Neil Pembroke. He's an Aussie. And he asked the question, what is foundational in the ministry of care? So in the service of care, not just a ministry as religion or spirituality, but just all of us who serve and all of us who care. I hope that you are caring for grandkids, caring for children, caring for neighbors, caring for folks in your communities. Wherever you care, listening goes hand in hand with that. So what is foundational in the ministry of care? It's listening, but it's beyond just listening, as we'll see. It's a deep receptivity to the other's pain. It's empathy. It's I care and I understand your pain. I don't know what it's like to go through your horrific situation. I don't know what it's like to feel the exact pain that you're going through. I don't know what it might be like for this young girl or this young boy to feel bullied on the playground, but I can see their pain. I can care deeply with all of my being, and at some level I can understand at a minimum that they're hurting, and I need to reach in and get into their story and walk a mile in their shoes, so to speak. And it's also about compassion. The Greek word for compassion has to do with literally our guts, our intestines, our bowels. And so it wouldn't go well on a Hallmark card. We wouldn't say, oh, I love you, sweetie pie, with all my large intestine. No, we would say, I love you with all my heart. Well, in ancient times, they didn't feel like the heart was the seat of all emotions. They thought that your gut was the seat of all emotion. And I can relate to that because I tend to follow my gut quite a bit, whether that's follow my gut to the buffet table or the dinner table, or whether I follow my gut instinct when I'm listening to a person's story. So it involves compassion, just caring again with all of your innermost being, everything that's within you. We are there to care. So if that's foundation, we might have some preconceived notions about what good listening involves. Maybe you're pretty good at the general mechanics of listening. You can do a good oil change of listening. You can tell when you need to kind of, make sure you check the oil for having the proper level in there. You might even be good at changing the windshield wiper fluid or making sure there's enough coolant in the antifreeze holder. Well, mechanics of good listening are a great place to start. We need to be still and quiet when someone else is talking to us. We need to make eye contact. We need to lean in. I was taught to have square shoulders approaching directly to the person. Don't turn yourself to the side and look over your shoulder at the person when you're there to care and listen. You're directly in front of the person. You're all in tune to what they need. Those are the good mechanics, even the good advanced mechanics of learning how to ask clarifying questions, or being able to paraphrase or validate what a person is saying to you could be advanced mechanics. That might be like the tune-up or the transmission overhaul. But mechanics will only get us so far, and that's why in this presentation I want to focus on the three-part harmony of listening. And I've got a whole nother webinar that will be out there on this, just this aspect of listening. But the three-part harmony of listening involves listening with our hands, and this is the mechanics of listening. Our hands are the first thing that we need to do. We need to get our hands on the story. We need to be able to touch and taste and feel and hear and smell what's going on in this person's story. And we do that by tuning in, being present. We do that by asking some clarifying questions if something doesn't make a lot of sense. And as you'll see here, we're focused on the content, the 5 W's and the H we learned in journalism: who, what, when, where, why, and how. We're interested in the facts and the figures. If we don't have our facts straight, it's going to be really hard to progress to the other movements of the story eventually. Then we want to listen with our mind, our head. We want to think about what they're telling us. We want to ask ourselves, why are they telling me this? And why are they telling me this now? When little Johnny or little Susie comes up to you, and there might be just kids in your neighborhood that are friends with your kids, or they might be children in a Sunday school class or children in your classroom in the large public school, whenever they come up to you with a concern or a question or a story that they want to tell you, pause, tune in, get the facts of the story, but then ask yourself, why are they telling me this? And why are they telling me this now? That's our curiosity at work. We also want to process the emotion of which they're telling us this story. Are they sad as they're telling us the story? Are they excited and they can't stop shaking? What are their nonverbal cues? Are they gruff with their arms crossed and their head down, but they say they're fine? If a patient of yours in the hospital and you're a nurse and you walk in and their face is all contorted and their body is just, twisted and turned, and yet they tell you that they're fine, you're not going to believe them because you're going to cue into their nonverbals. We want to think about ask them and think about, what do you mean by fill in the blank? Or what's this like for you to recall this story? Or what was that like for you in the story when this happened? Those are great questions to take the story further, the harmony of listening further. Finally, we want to listen with our heart. In 21st century Western world, we talk about our heart. I won't gross you out with more stories of our gut, but it does involve our gut listening as well. So heart and gut listening tunes into the metaphors and the images of the story. This is where we start to dive into really what did they mean when they use this colorful language in this story. We're unconsciously talking in words and images all the time. We rarely say exactly what we mean. Just think about the last time you were trying to decipher what your spouse was trying to tell you about his or her day. Did they just directly tell you, or did they tell you a story that you had to interpret? So many times we have to interpret the story. And in our world, in hospice work and healthcare, especially as folks are aging and getting up there into their golden years and past the golden years, maybe reaching platinum status, you'll hear someone say, I just want to go home. I just want to go home. And Dorothy had it right. There is no place like home. But oftentimes I'll ask them, are you talking about your physical home where you lived before your time here in the nursing home or the hospital? Or are you talking about some sort of a heavenly home or some sort of spiritual home or spiritual place that you will go where your spirit will go when you die? Sometimes they don't want anything to do with the spiritual talk. They just look at me like I have two heads. Other times like, yeah, how did you know? I just wish I could go and be at home where I feel like all this worry and trouble will go away. So let's look at the 7 movements of listening. It's much like a symphony. When Beethoven or Mozart wrote a symphony, they started with an introduction, or they started introducing themes of the symphony in the early parts of their movement that might be a 20-minute long symphony, but each movement stands on its own and introduces colors and themes and motifs that will be explored in further detail as the symphony unfolds. So it's much like that as a story. Each story unfolds, and in order to allow the story to unfold, we have to receive that story well. We have to tune in well. And here are 7 movements of the story that we can listen to, and they don't always flow in chronological order. Sometimes we might start with movement 1, and then we hear a motif that takes us off to movement 3, and then we realize, oh, I missed movement 2. Let me, back up the tape or push the rewind button on my phone to get back to movement 2, and then I'll skip ahead to movement 6. But these 7 movements are really steps that you can take as you allow the story to unfold. I think every story needs to begin with number 1. This is a great starting point. It's the mechanics of good listening. You have to begin to listen with empathy. Heart, mind, body, soul, all in tune in this moment to receive this person's story, especially if it's a story of pain. Even a story of great joy needs to be received with a feeling, matching the feeling of what is going on. And then we move on to examining their story. This is where we start to work with our hands and then our heads after we get a hold of the story. Well, what do they mean by that? What's going on in the story? Oh, I wonder about this. I'm getting really curious to find out how all this is going to unfold. And then as much as you're in tune to their story, you need to get in tune to your own story, your own heart and soul. Oh, how is this affecting me? Oh, I notice a tension in my gut as they're telling me this, or oh, I can sense the tears are about to form as they're sharing this heartbreak. We just need to be aware and start examining where are those emotions coming up for me in that moment, because those will be helpful as we continue to listen and navigate the story. At some point in your journey with this person, whether again it's a preschool child or a 105-year-old under hospice care, you have to push pause at one moment in the time together and say, what exactly do you think would be the most helpful for our time right now? I may only have 5 minutes to be with this person, and I need to honestly say up front, I really want to hear your story. I really want to be here for you, but I have only 5 minutes. What would be the best way to spend this 5 minutes? That establishes a contract. It establishes a covenant, a mutual respect and mutual agreement of how this movement, how this symphony is going to unfold. The composer had an agreement with the musicians, how they would play the music, what tempo, what beat, with the dynamics of the movements of the symphony. And then the musicians and the composer have a contract with the audience that they're going to present this piece of movement, this piece of art. If you paid money to go see the Colorado Symphony perform Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, and all of a sudden they started playing Beatles songs, you'd be like, what? That wasn't part of the agreement. I agreed, I paid money to hear a Beethoven symphony. So there's got to be an agreement. There's got to be a point where you mutually come together to make sure you're on the same page. The next few movements are where you can begin to jump off at any point in time. You might be hearing a story of loss, and you might be listening for ways that they're coping. You're looking at their strengths and the liabilities of their story. You're reflecting, boy, what is their purpose in all this? Why did this happen now? What's the greater good that could come from this? And sometimes we're literally asking those questions with the person, not that we have the answers, but that we're helping them just process and think through this and getting to the deeper meaning, the deeper levels of the symphony. And at some level, if you have the opportunity, you're probably, even after step 1 and 2, you're probably ready to jump to step 7, which is strategies for healing. I'd encourage you, unless after you establish a contract of care, the only thing that person wants to hear from you is one tip and one technique to get through their trouble, avoid giving strategies for healing until you've really gotten into the movements of the symphony. Let the movements of the story unfold, and oftentimes the person we're with will find their strategies for healing, and those are going to be the most powerful strategies to move forward with. And this, if you want to look further at this, I took this from Dr. Carrie Doring in her book, The Practice of Pastoral Care, a Postmodern Approach. So 7 movements of listening. Again, here's a couple questions that go with each, questions or statements that go with each movement, and you can read these on your own. Listen with empathy. Examine their story and yours. Oftentimes the stories can become so close. Oh, you had that problem? I have that problem. You lost your grandfather recently? I lost my grandfather recently. You hated green beans? I hate green beans. Whatever brings you close to the person, that can be a very powerful connector, but it can also be very tempting to be a huge landmine where I completely jump the railroad track and put my story on top of their story and just shove it down. And that doesn't allow that person to tell their story fully. It squelches the story. It squelches the movement. What would be most helpful now? That's another great question to make sure you've got in your toolbox. Listening for the violence or listening for the loss is so important. What's your support system like? Realizing our culture really stinks at grief, really stinks at empathy. We're kind of like the just get over it and move on group. Or we're really compassionate for a day or a week maybe, but don't be telling me your same problem over and over again for the next 3 months. Go to a therapist for that. As friends, we need to have a little more compassion to understand that some of these stories just take time to unravel, take time to find their healing, and it might be years that we're walking with someone as they're going through their story. Reflecting on meaning and purpose, we might ask them about their faith. What brings you hope? What brings you joy? How did you even get up in the morning? That's a strength question as well. And exploring strategies. We're always thinking safety first. If you hear or sense or your gut is telling you this person is in danger to themselves or danger to others, you must ask. You must choose safety first, even if you feel it's going to put the kibosh on this time of exploring their story. Safety always comes first, and then follow up with whatever your level of reporting is according to the law. Here's a case study for you that I'd encourage you to consider. I'd encourage you to look at this and consider what you would do if you were in this story. I went to visit a family, and I found out that this gentleman was dying of cirrhosis of the liver. At the age of 37, he had basically spent 25 years of being an alcoholic, all through his teen years, his young adult years, his adult years as a working man in the Denver area. And at the age of 37, his liver was just done. And as I met with him, there was a large family in his living room. And the first thing his mom said to me is like, "Good, you're here. Now you can save my son. You're a minister, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." "You can save my son, right?" And I said, "I'm not sure that's really what I'm here for. I need to find out more about your son and get to know you all." She was trying to establish a contract of care before I had even heard her story, heard the situation, and I knew that that wasn't something I could legitimately promise her, because it's not my job to save anyone. It's my job to receive their pain, to be with them, to listen to them, and to seek healing together in whatever path we might choose to go down. So she told me about her son. He was the youngest of a large minority family living in a small home in the Denver metro area. Her son was the one who would fix all the neighborhood kids' bikes. Her son was the one that would walk the little old ladies across the street, literally. He was the one that would take all the leftover grocery shopping carts in the parking lot and bring them back to the store. And yet he was drunk all the time. He had lost his father, who was a career military man, to alcoholism after his father retired from the military. He had lost another sibling from alcohol toxicity, and his family just knew that this disease had run rampant through their family, and this young man, Sam, was the next. And I'm changing some of the details to keep confidentiality. And so as I'm listening to their story, they're telling me about how they're members of a local Baptist church, how faith is so important to them. They've been praying for Sam to get healed, and they were so disappointed that he not gone to church in so many years. It really didn't seem to have any faith anymore. And all this to boot, he had a teenage daughter who at that point was the apple of his eye, love of his life, his best friend in the whole wide world. And the thought of him not being there for her high school graduation or to walk her down the aisle someday was just heart-wrenching for this family. At that moment, Sam came out and said, "What are you guys doing out here? What's going on? How come I don't know what's going on here? Are you here to preach at me? Because I ain't listening to any preacher." I said, "Whoa, first of all, Sam, my name's Nate. It's nice to meet you." And I just tried to establish a bond of trust with him, tried to meet with him, find out more about his story. And it became a really close person. Our stories were very, very close. I had lost my dad. I had a daughter that was just a newborn at that point. I didn't know what it was like to have a teenage daughter. I had a very close family I was extremely fond of, and I knew I had to be very careful because it'd be very easy to become just sucked into his story, and I'd lose the ability to objectively ask the questions and objectively keep my story out of his picture. As I share this story, I'd invite you to pause. I'd invite you to journal. I'd invite you to think about, okay, if I'm Sam's mom's friend, and she came to me and said, Sam doesn't have long to live. His alcoholism has raged on. The doctor even said that if he even stops drinking at this point, it'll probably shorten his life because his body's become so accustomed to the alcohol. How would you approach caring and listening to Sam's mom if you were her friend? Maybe you know each other from the neighborhood. Maybe you know each other from church. How would you respond to Sam's mom if you were her nurse in the doctor's office and her blood pressure was out of whack and her diabetes was out of control because of all this stress? She wasn't eating well, she wasn't sleeping well, she wasn't taking care of herself, and she begins to unload all of this as you're the nurse in the doctor's office. What would you tune into and be concerned about? If you're Sam's social worker and you're thinking about, how do I help Sam prepare for this closure with the life with his daughter? What kind of subjects would you want to address? What would you think about doing? Would you think about trying to bring them together at some level? Would you think about some sort of family meeting or family counseling or referral to family counseling, or is it too late? Walk this through. How would you intersect with this story? What are the questions you'd want to clarify, get your hands on? What are the thoughts in your mind as they share this to you? What are the metaphors that they're talking about? You can just run with this. Use this case study to encourage your listening. So here's the case study just again. If you haven't paused, if you haven't talked through this was just some of my thoughts as I went through the 7 movements. I began with empathy. I just wanted to let them know I cared. I wanted to connect with them on a relational level. I wanted to hear their story. They had a lot to say, so I didn't have to ask a lot of questions, but I then moved quickly to make sure they understood that my time with them, my care with them was not to save anyone, but to journey with them, to walk with them through this difficult time. And then we obviously had to touch on the losses. Loss was everywhere in their story. Even the anticipating of the loss was so difficult to hear them talk through. Had to encourage strengths, had to encourage them to find the strengths that they needed to rely on to make it through this time and to keep their family together. Had to look for ultimate purpose, ultimate meaning in this. And eventually we weren't able to cure Sam's disease. We weren't able to cure Sam from drinking anymore. We weren't able to cure every ounce of family dysfunction, but we were able to establish a healing, peaceful passing for Sam. He eventually came off of hospice care because he really was functioning so well that for a good year. And a year later, we heard from the family that he wasn't doing well, and we were able to be with Sam in his final days. So one of the keys to this symphony of listening, as I mentioned, is looking for loss. Losses in so many of our stories. Loss of material, relational, loss of functional roles. For Sam's mom, the loss of being his primary caregiver was weighing heavy on her heart. We'll look for coping landmines. Obviously, the coping in Sam's life had led him to out-of-control drinking for 25 years. Even as a teenager, I believe he probably even dropped out of high school, but I don't recall. And anything that gets in the way of a person's ability to live, laugh, and love is going to cause trouble in their story. And that's something you just want to look out for. Want to help them process. Oftentimes the landmines cannot be something physical, but it's something emotional, like an emotional trigger, or these parallel stories are so close that I get triggered by what's going on in this person's life, that my emotions are jumping out of control. My heart is racing. And so I just want to jump in and try to be their savior. I call that jumping the tracks, jumping the parallel railroad tracks. If you jump the tracks, you're going to squash the story. Again, jumping the tracks, you're going to squash the story. I'm going to begin to take this in for a landing by focusing on balancing awareness with action. You can be so conscious of your internal processor as you're listening, and so focused on your own self-awareness of what's going on inside of yourself because you don't want to jump the tracks, that sometimes we fail to take action. Or we can want to take action so quickly that we fail to be aware in the situation. So we want to put the movements into motion. Very simply, here's some practical applications. Show up on time. That's not necessarily the time on the clock. That's important, but the time when you're needed. If you can sense that someone needs to unload their story, and you can make even 5 minutes for them, and you can put everything else to the side, show up and be on time for that story. Then the next piece is to get dressed for the occasion. Just be prepared. Put the distractions to the side, mentally center yourself, say a prayer, take a deep breath, whatever you need to do to prepare for the occasion. Come dressed for the occasion. Remember that silence is golden. Silence is such a huge part of this equation that you can't underestimate how much it's important is to be quiet. Excuse me a moment. Let me get this put back up here. So we're talking about putting the movements into motion. Start showing up on time. Then we talked about being dressed for the occasion, being prepared for what's coming up. Remembering that silence truly is golden. Remembering to listen with our hands, our head, our heart. I want to encourage you all also that when in doubt, when you're not sure what to say or do, or you feel stuck, just validate. Let them know that you hear them. I hear your pain. I hear you saying that this is very hard for you, or, oh, this seems so frustrating, or I can see why this makes you so angry in this moment. Validate their emotions. There's so much wisdom in just being with the person. And then don't linger when it seems like they're done sharing, or it seems like your time is really up and you're going to become more distracted or unable to continue to focus. Just know that it's okay to go. So I'd really encourage you, put this into practice. Practice, walking through the 7 movements, listening with empathy, unpacking the story, developing that contract of care, tuning into these other issues, whether it's a loss, whether it's dynamic issues in the family, whatever the concerns might be, really tuning in with your hands, your head, your heart, and you will find that by being present, by walking alongside these folks that are in trouble, you are advancing faith, hope, and love to the lost and lonely out there. And here are some great resources for you. I will have these links out there that you can go back and see some other webinars that I've done on soul keeping for your own personal self-care, companioning troubled souls, which is very similar to this, but again, these are laying a foundation that then you can take and advance that foundation by putting these 7 movements of the symphony of listening together. I'd invite you to check out my blog where I try to provide some written encouragement and resources. You might be interested in The Art of Listening by Neil Pembroke or The Practice of Pastoral Care by Dr. Carrie Doring. Another favorite author of mine that I've learned so much from is Dr. Larry Crabb. His two books, Connecting and Soul Talk, take listening and tune it into the spiritual realm and what is going on as you're listening more with your spiritual ears and eyes open to this person's life and their story. But most of all, I want to thank you for your support of this service. And it's a great honor to be encouraging you in this army of hope. Thank you for being a part of this tribe. Thank you for being an agent of hope who goes out there and advances faith, hope, and love. And thank you for listening to our time today. I'd encourage you again to share this. If this has been helpful for you, invite your friends, your colleagues to sign up for the Hope Connection email resource, and they will get a copy of this webinar sent directly to them. Thank you again for your time. Blessings to you on the journey. May each of you begin to listen to the 7 movements of a person's story and enjoy the symphony of harmony that comes as you listen to them fully. Take care now. We'll see you soon.